The British will elect a new parliament in the summer. Prime Minister Sunak announced the date for the early election of the House of Commons. And in polls, the opposition Labour Party is currently quite well ahead of the governing Tories, and that puts them under a lot of pressure. So the next parliamentary election in Great Britain will take place on July 4th, and Rishi Sunak has scheduled the new elections and confirmed the date in a speech in front of his official residence in Downing Street in London. "The time has now come for Britain to decide its future," said Sunak in pouring rain. The Prime Minister thus ended weeks of speculation about the election date. Sunak had previously called his cabinet together for a meeting in London, and many observers consider this a risky maneuver. In the vote, Sunak's Conservatives face a devastating defeat against Keir Starmer's Labour Party. And according to polls, the Social Democrats are around 20 percentage points ahead of the Prime Minister's Conservatives. If this result occurs in the election, the Conservatives, who have been in power since 2010, are likely to suffer a historic defeat. Sunak has been in office since October 2022. After Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, he's already the third head of government since the most recent elections in 2019. Unlike in Germany, in the United Kingdom, the Prime Minister has a generous amount of time to decide on the election date. He must give notice at least 25 working days in advance. The opposition has been urging Sunak for months to finally set an election date. They accused him of delaying the election date as long as possible in view of the poor poll ratings. Despite several announcements and recently improved economic data, Sunak's Conservatives have so far failed to reduce the gap to Labour. Most recently, they lost hundreds of seats and an important mayoral post in local elections in England and a constituency in northwest England in a by-election to Parliament. The right-wing populist party Reform UK, the former Brexit party, is also putting increasing pressure on the Tories. The Tories have been in power in Great Britain, as I said, since 2010, but that could soon change. And a look at the current poll shows that people in the United Kingdom are longing for a change. A heavy defeat for the Conservatives seems inevitable, and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's party is facing a debacle in the next election in Great Britain on July 4th. He believes it's time now for Great Britain to decide its future, but the election date is surprising. After all, the Tories are far behind the Labour Party in the polls, as I said, and the Conservatives therefore have little time to catch up. However, elections should have been held by January 28th next year at the latest, and then the House of Commons would have been automatically dissolved after 5 years. In Great Britain, however, it's common for the British government to set a date beforehand. The fact that Sunak is holding elections in July is indeed surprising. The current polls in Great Britain are indeed absolutely disastrous for the incumbent Tory government. And depending on the poll, Keir Starmer's opposition Labour Party is leading by between 15 and 25 percentage points. And there are no signs of a U-turn yet. In the current polls, the gap between the two major parties in Great Britain remains largely stable. And I saw really bad numbers. The polls must, however, be seen in the context of the electoral law in the United Kingdom. And this is because the relative majority vote is used there. Whoever can get the most votes wins the constituency, and all other votes are lost. An absolute majority is not necessary, so there is no second round of voting. And the British Parliament has a total of 650 members. So what could the end result look like? One forecast predicts a triumph for Labour and a debacle for the Tories, with Labour getting 480 seats. But the popularity of the Labour Party is only one aspect. The threat from the right is also problematic for Prime Minister Sunak's party. Even if the Reform UK party has little chance of winning seats in the British majority voting system, it's still likely to cost the ruling Tories votes because of the first-past-the-post system. And in view of the current polls, the opposition in Great Britain is calling for this early election as well. But Sunak refused to hear them for some time. And in an analysis at the time, the Times listed reasons for that. But the government was hoping for an improved economic situation, shorter waiting lists for the health service, and a drop in migration and falling inflation. In any case, the current polls should have been the best reason for the British Prime Minister to postpone the election date as far back as possible. The early election date surprised even party confidence. For a long time, an election in the autumn was considered the most likely option for this. And seriously, a lot of people were surprised. The Prime Minister had probably chosen the least bad time for his announcement. Although the British economy is still weak, the Conservative government has recently been able to celebrate, let's say, small progress. In his speech, the Prime Minister emphasized that he had achieved two important milestones during his term in office. It had succeeded in reducing inflation and achieving faster economic growth than other G7 countries. The inflation rate has fallen to 2.3%. That's the lowest level in 3 years. And we heard that last week, Wednesday. The prospect that the first deportation flights with illegal immigrants are due to take off to Rwanda in East Africa in the next few weeks may also have prompted the Prime Minister to call the election early in the hope of benefiting from media coverage. The underlying immigration law, which has passed in April after a long political and legal tug-of-war, is the centerpiece of the Conservative election campaign. The project has so far cost around £240 million, and not a single deportation plane is taking off. We leave out the one volunteer here. He's also helped by the fact that the half-yearly immigration figures will be announced, but they are not that good. But there are also strong arguments against the later election date. The number of illegal immigrants crossing the English Channel usually increases in the summer, and an earlier vote would forestall this. In addition, with each additional deportation flight, the likelihood increases that such a flight will be blocked by international jurisdiction, such as that of the European Court of Human Rights, or that the Conservatives will maneuver themselves into open conflict with the internationally respected institution if they violate this law. But how will Brexit figure in this election? And two predictions may be made here. The first is that the leaders of the main parties will try to avoid the subject of Brexit as much as possible. And the second is that the issue of Brexit will haunt the election campaign nonetheless. Each of the main party leaders has their own reasons to try and avoid the subject of Brexit. For Sunak, he has no incentive to draw attention to a policy that most of the British electorate has seen as a failure. In actual fact, one of the few concrete achievements of his own that Sunak can point is that the Windsor Framework of February 2023, which tied up many of the loose ends of Boris Johnson's Brexit deal. The Windsor Framework finally allowed the UK to fully normalise post-Brexit relations with the EU, in particular as it relates to Northern Ireland. And this agreement finally allowed for the restoration of power sharing at Stormont earlier this year. However, Sunak will almost certainly never mention this success during the election campaign because there are few votes to be gained from it. Starmer, on the other hand, has his own reasons to stay mum on the subject of Brexit. He has calculated that Labour's best strategy is to aim to make Brexit work by ameliorating the worst aspects of the ongoing UK-EU relationship. However, he has already ruled out the boldest moves, rejoining the single market or the customs union, or bringing back freedom of movement. For this reason, in keeping with the famous Ming-Wei strategy of doing nothing that could harm his polling lead, he's likely to avoid the subject as much as possible. However, the issue of Brexit will haunt the election nonetheless, because the ill effects of Brexit are still being felt. And Brexit is still imposing an economic penalty on the nation's trade, investment and the overall growth. Moreover, the Brexit process is far from complete. The UK is only just now bringing in post-Brexit controls on the movement of goods, and there are yet more cliff edges to come, especially on the financial markets. Disparate issues such as migration and the Russian-Ukraine war press the dire need for an improvement in the EU-UK relations. Only in the early hours of July 5th, after the dust has settled from the frenzy of the campaign, will it become clear how the new government is likely to address the question. Well, not that fast probably, but then we will know who will be the government, and then we can at least guess a direction. Nevertheless, if you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.